guys are about to have a really happy, relaxing Thanksgiving. So I don't want to be the one to put too much on your plate this week. So I'm just going to give you a few things to do this week. One of the ideas I wanted to introduce you to is the idea of sexual addiction. This is something that's not currently accepted into the DSM because it doesn't meet the criteria for an addiction. It's interesting, they have hyposexual sexual drive, but they don't have hyper. But in general, sexual addiction is also known by other names, but it's a state characterized by compulsive participation or engagement in sexual activity despite the negative consequences. So this is kind of the area that I started working in sex therapy. I was doing my doctoral internship, I think I mentioned, in New York at the SUNY Sex Therapy Clinic. And one of the things we did is run a group around sex therapy. And I thought it was really interesting. Now, whenever I would talk to people about that, they would say, well, if you were going to have an addiction, this is the one to have. But they weren't seeing the ways that people's lives can be ruined by compulsive sexual activity. If people were putting themselves at physical risk, people were losing their jobs, people were doing, so it's usually in a more extreme way. I'll give you some material that helps you know when it might categorize itself, be categorized as a sexual addiction. So sexual addiction, that with you. So there's different types of sexual addiction. There are areas that seems to be focused on. If you really want to learn more about this, Patrick Carnes is sort of the founder of this idea, this concept of sexual addiction. He has some really great resources. One of my favorite books by him is called "Don't Call It Love," which is separating this, that sometimes sex becomes a substitution for love. But it could fall into different categories. People may be addicted to fantasy sex, seductive role sex, voyeuristic sex. We worked with quite a few people who had an addiction to basically peeping on people, voyeuring on people. Intrusive sex, doing obscene phone calls, that might be a thing of the past, but flashing people, masturbation, exhibitionism, things like that. Exhibitionism, sex trading, anonymous sex, paying for sex, pay in exchange, exploitive sex. These are areas that addiction areas that came up quite a bit. Why sexual addiction? Why does it exist? There's different theories for this. One is that something in the person's life is such that they don't feel a degree of intensity. So there's this draw, this need for arousal. They have the sensation that life is boring. And they may feel this in different ways. It could be other addictive behaviors, drug use, substance abuse, gambling, and so forth. But sex can also do that similarly, like constant seeking out sexual activity, maybe in risky places. I worked with quite a few people who lost their jobs because they were having sex at work. They definitely lost their family. They often lost their health. So things like that. It could be a need for satiation. They're just saying, like, there's no happiness in my life, and so sex becomes a way to connect with that. It's sort of interesting. I put this thing up here about bulimia or overeating. It's sort of like when people have addiction issues around food. It's not in that we don't want them to completely stop. We just want them to find a healthier balance, which is different than when you're working with an addiction where the goal is to have them not have any of that. So it could be a need for fantasy. Reality is too hard. They need a quick escape. And that can be similar to other types of addictions where it's all about the fantasy. Okay, so there's different ideas about how people might come to be sexually addicted. One is the addiction theory, parent-child attachment. There's intimacy problems between the parents and the child, and it might be sort of a generational thing. It's often true that I find that people are coming from a context of shame, where as they're starting to notice themselves as sexual beings, they receive really negative messages about sex. And then it's very common that people who struggle with this are coming from a family dynamic of perfectionism. That if that you have to be perfect, and so this is one of those outlets for where they're not perfect. It may start really simply around they're masturbating, but because it's a shameful activity, it needs to be over quickly, and then they feel guilt, which leads to more shame and so forth. Sometimes it's tied to child abuse, and in all its different forms. Sometimes when people have a negative experience, particularly around sexual abuse, they do one of two things. They may go away from it. They may try and do things to make it so that they're not attractive to other people. They may distance themselves from any sex. But sometimes people go the opposite way. This was this negative experience in my life, and so they go towards it, and so they become overly sexual. It's kind of like they want to keep engaging with this thing that has been painful in their lives to come to understand it. It's sort of a cycle. Child abuse, and then they have sort of post-traumatic stress responses, and then they find that masturbating or sexually acting out numbs that, and so it becomes part of that cycle. Just like with other addictions, there's often family roles that are there. There's rules such as don't feel, don't talk, don't trust, don't think, and definitely don't change. And then, just like you would find in other places, there's usually if there's a sexually dependent person, there's usually someone that's enabling him, enabling her. There's usually someone in the system that's super responsible and sort of the hero, and then the other ones can play into, just like with any other addiction. I don't know if you've taken the addiction course yet or not. So some ideas about how to help people who are stuck in acting out sexually in ways that are causing harm to their lives. Usually they've tried a lot of things before they will come to see you, but it's usually falling under first order change. Like, I'm going to control myself. I'm not going to let myself do this. I'm going to delete Tinder or Grindr. I'm going to basically I'm going to do more and more control. And then they have a sense of alienation. They feel different. They work really hard at secret keeping. If they reveal something, like maybe they'll tell their partner a little bit, like, I've had an affair, but they may not say, I have sex every day, multiple times a day with multiple people. So usually they start out with just a little bit of the story. Part of the rationale that they often will have is that no one is hurt about this. By this, I'm just having sex. No one's hurt by this. They're not looking at the ways that can be very, very hurtful. So addiction is a first order problem, and the harder you try and control it, the worse it gets. So sort of based on similar things to AA models and other recovery programs, you want to help them move to a second order change. And one of the ways is the idea of powerlessness. I kind of think of this more like Buddhist, sort of like letting go. Like, I cannot. This is not something that you can control. And then you try and get them involved in lots of ways. Like, there are also 12-step programs for this, where they can have a community of people to talk about. You're trying to get rid of the isolation. They may be able to have a sponsor there that can help check on them. And then this is a big part for you as a therapist. Your goal is to help them not to have any secrets, to fully reveal. Now, that can be quite traumatic. So the partner or other people in their lives may need a lot of support in a different way. But your goal is to help them to become more honest and to disclose the full story. The full story could be so many things. It could be the number of partners. It could be the amount of money that they spend on it. It could be that they have an apartment that they've rented on their own so that they have a place to have sex. It could be prostitution. It could be all kinds of things. So the goal is to help them to share that with important people in their lives. And then shame is such a huge part of this. So part of the goal is to help them move from thinking of themselves as bad as seeing themselves as hurt. Like, if you could help them reconnect with the ways that what the wounds that led to this, that they were numbing in the first place, that's much more powerful than a focus on accountability in the sense of like in a way that could be shaming. Okay, so other things with healing compulsions and addictions. Interpersonal, you want to help them develop healthy bonds. Sometimes by the time they come to you, their only relationships are hookups. So you may be helping them with basic social skills about how to make friends, non-sexual friends, um, and to experience intimacy in ways that are not sexual. And then I think it's often helpful to help them reconnect with spiritual. Now, what that would look like them is individual, but helping them move to a place of, I mean, spirituality can be really powerful in a way of helping them to find redemption and to start to see themselves as someone worthy. And then interpersonal, help them mourn the loss. Like they have probably experienced multiple loss, and that may be their health, and that may continue to be an issue. It may be their relationships. It may be relationships with their partners, their children, or others, family of origin, etc. You want to help people rediscover the goodness in themselves. They often will come in with so much shame that they can barely function. You giving them a little bit of compassion can go a really long way, and helping them to find out those things of those that they're doing well and enlarging those. And then you want to help them rediscover meaning and significance. And one of the ways to do that is to help them to start helping other people, taking the focus off of themselves. Now, with any addiction, sometimes there needs to be an element of a loving but firm structure. There are live-in programs. There are Sexual Addictions Anonymous. There's other 12-step groups out there. Most people who are very far into this have really developed a life where there's little contact with others, and there's very little accountability and very little structure. And then I apply the crucible approach that we talked about from SNARCH. And then just know that if they're still in a relationship, if they haven't lost their partner, that you're going to need to do some couple work. I think you'll need to do some individual work with both partners, because like I said, it's one thing to find out your partner's had an affair. It's another to find out that they've had continual affairs with multiple people, and then you you start off working on that, and then you help them with communication, and then all the things that you would normally do with couples. Okay, now I'm gonna show you a version of what I might do with someone to try and I'm doing several things. I'm trying to reframe what the addictive behavior means. I'm trying to help them start to develop compassion for themselves and see themselves as someone who's suffered rather than bad, and I'm trying to do it without causing them more shame. So this is not perfect, and it would be much better with a person. But here's an example. Okay, I think I understand something that you've been. Okay, would it be okay for you if I have an idea about what you're saying, but I want to see if I understand it well. You've been acting out in ways sexually that have caused you a lot of problems. You're telling me about how it's causing you problems with your partner, and and that you recently lost your job because you were having sex with people at work. Let me try and see if I can understand it. This is one of the ways that I'm thinking about it, and you tell me if this fits for you or not. Okay, so we've been talking a lot about the different things that have happened in your life. Like you told me about how when you were a child, you were often left at home alone, and we talked about how that is a form of neglect. You also told me about how you experienced abuse by one of your uncles, and so you talked about the abuse. You talked about how you grew up, and in your teen years you felt very isolated and lonely, and that not a lot of people were paying attention to you. So you experienced this isolation, and really as we've talked about a lot of things here, it's kind of like you. I don't know if this fits for you, but it's kind of like you have this pool of pain. I mean, really, as we've been talking, there's been days I wondered, like, with all of that, the pain that you're carrying around, how was it that you were able to get up today and come and see me? I really appreciate the strength that you show and the courage that you have. And so because of that and all the things that you're still able to do, I know that you can't always be right here in the middle of the pool of pain. So what I think happens is you've figured out ways not to feel it. So you kind of have a barrier between you and this pool of pain. So sometimes part of the barrier is you tell me that you run a lot, you like to exercise, you really like to read a good book, you spend time with family, and you spend time with your friends, and then you do meditation, and you do other things, and that's sort of like that first barrier to make it so that you're not always feeling the pull of pain. But sometimes that's just not strong enough. Like you told me about how the other day you were in the mall and you heard a song play, which was a song that you had heard during the time that you were experiencing abuse. And when something like that happens, it just cuts through here, and you're right back there in the pool of pain again. So I think because that happens, sometimes you need a different barrier to not be in the pool of pain. So there's also this other level of what I think is kind of a form of protection, and this is where maybe you're drinking, maybe you've been smoking a lot of pot lately. You've talked about cutting in the past, although that seems to be happening less and less. And then it sounds like one of the main things that you will do when something breaks through and you feel that pain is that you will act out sexually. So it also doesn't surprise me that when we were talking the last week that we got into some really painful memories of yours, and right after that you went from here and you went to the park and you picked up someone and had sex in the car. Like there's actually a link between that, and this will be a message for us because this will let us know. So if you're feeling that kind of what we could call triggering, then that's letting us know that we're going too fast and that we need to slow down. And I know that you don't want to do these things because what you're saying happens is, like, when you do this, it's sort of it numbs you for a moment, but then it adds shame, and so it continues to fill up the pool of pain. So what I think we got to do is we got to find a way to sort of. I mean, before I go on, I'll say, like, you told me once that you think that if you didn't act out, that you might take your life. Like, to me, that was a really powerful statement because what it's saying is that these guardians are so important that they've actually kept you alive. So even though you want to get rid of them, I think we need to be respectful that they're there and they're serving a purpose. So what I want to do is I want to figure out a way to kind of ask their permission and go slow, and then come over here and start working on this pool of pain to figure out how we might drain it and how we might find other ways to protect yourself when something is breaking through your barriers. I think we do need to go slow, and I do think we need to think about these differently. I know it's something you want to change in your life, but let's go. Let's. They're there for a reason, so let's respect that and figure out other ways to protect yourself so that you're not in the pool of pain, but in a way that doesn't sort of um, leave you vulnerable. So let's start with that. Would that be okay?